to DCPC, relatively. I grew up in Charlotte, so not too far down the road, and did probably met some of you a few years ago. I led your church retreat up in Montreat. Oh gosh, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago now, but so it's good to have some familiarity, but it's good to be back with you. Come on in, welcome, welcome. I want to introduce a little bit about Next Church, which is the organization that I work for, just so you get a little bit of context of where I'm coming from, and then we're going to jump into our main work for today. Next Church is a movement within the PCUSA that is trying to help us figure out how to be the faithful church in the 21st century, as so many of our institutional models that have served us well for several generations are simply not serving us as well today as the culture has changed around us. So we believe that God is always calling the church into the future. So we're trying to cultivate congregations and leaders who are working in sustained, effective, and faithful ways to promote God's transformation of our communities so we can continue to be the faithful church that we've been called to be. So as Next Church, we try to support and equip congregations to be as strong and as vital as they can be, to develop leaders who want to be leaders of healthy change in our congregations, and to try to strengthen connections across our denomination, connecting healthy tissue to healthy tissue, as we're all learning about how to be God's faithful people in this day and time. We do our work in several ways. The biggest, kind of splashiest thing that we do is an annual national gathering that moves around the country. This March, it's going to be in Seattle, Washington. So you're welcome to come to that if you want to take a trip west, basically as far as you can go. But we also live stream that, so you can watch it all online if you want to participate that way. And then all the videos are also available online. So it's a great resource at nextchurch.net. You can check that out and join us. We do have that online presence and a lot of resources on our website that are useful, and everything from thinking about stewardship to we have a guide there called Cultivated Ministry, which is a field guide that's trying to help us be more intentional about how do we evaluate and tell the story of what we're doing in transformation of our ministry. And then we do initiatives like coaching with congregations, and that's sort of that hat that we're wearing with you all. Personally, I'm the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, grew up in Charlotte. I now live in Washington, D.C., and I've served a congregation in Northern Virginia for 5 years, I guess, before coming on board with Next Church 7 years ago now. I've also served as, on the Committee on Ministry in National Capital Presbytery, which connects you to a lot of congregations across the spectrum of the church. So in all of those kind of arenas, as a pastor myself, I was feeling the tug of the changing culture of, I assume you all feel this here, but we were working harder and harder and harder just to sort of keep the status quo going. And so at some point you go, something is the matter here. We shouldn't need to keep working harder and harder and harder to just keep the line steady. As the chair of COM, I worked with a lot of congregations in our Presbyterian and saw a wide variety of the kinds of issues that congregations are experiencing, and the very real struggles they're having to find their way in this day and time. And then as director of Next Church, I spend a lot of my time in conversation with leaders from churches around the country, and so I get kind of a 10,000-foot view of what's going on in our denomination, and what people are struggling with, where they're finding success, how they're finding ways to change and morph and adapt to the changing realities around us. So in all of those areas, I'm finding that I'm convinced that God's Spirit is up to something in this day and time. And it's something significant that I hope Next Church and I can help us all pay attention to so that we can adapt and reform and be reforming people in response to those changes. Religious historians are talking about this period of time as significant as the Protestant Reformation in terms of the upheaval that we're going through. So it's no wonder that we're feeling a little bit adrift and like we're not sure what is happening, because that's what's happening, is that things are changing that significantly. But in the midst of that kind of change, we're called to ask some really big questions of ourselves and to engage in some significant discernment of who we are called to be. And that's really what we're going to be about tonight and in the campaign that follows this training tonight and the work that you all will do for the next couple of months. So we're here to help you learn how to be conveners of this relational process for discernment of the future of DCPC, and particularly the mission component of the capital campaign that you're undergoing. And my hope is that this process will help to get you connected to the DCPC community, both inside these walls and outside these walls, to hear from them, to help inspire the community through a process that will hopefully have theological and ethical integrity to it, to encourage ownership. And when I'm saying ownership, I'm really meaning participation and enthusiasm from a strong cross-section of the congregation, just beyond the usual suspects that we know turn up for things, and also to create the conditions for the vision that comes out of this to be one that's both a stretch, but also attainable for the congregation. So tonight, what I'm hoping we'll do is an overview of the process that we're about to embark upon, and then I'm going to teach and then we'll practice together one of the purpose group sessions that you all will be leading. And we'll talk a little bit about, we'll debrief that practice a little bit to try to make sure you feel confident in going out and leading those yourselves. And some of the conditions I think and have experienced will be necessary to make this successful. And we'll talk about some logistics, and we'll wrap up no later than 9 o'clock, but hopefully a little earlier than that. So does that sound like what you thought was going to happen tonight? Or is anybody like, whoa, came to the wrong meeting? Anything else you need me to do that I haven't named? We're good? Okay. All right. Well, as we get started, let's open with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, we trust that you are living and moving and breathing among us, and we give you thanks. We give you thanks for all that this day has held thus far and all that might still be in store for us this evening. We give you thanks for all of those who have come and gathered this night. We give you thanks for those who are not with us, but who are engaged in this work as well. We ask that your Spirit would be among us to help challenge and inspire, to share wisdom, that your Spirit would be among us to help create something new. We pray for a spirit of openness, pray for a spirit of clarity, so that we can be your people as best we are able. We pray this in your holy name, O God. Amen. Okay, so between now and mid-February, you are going to embark on a series of what we're calling purpose group meetings. And the hope is that in these meetings, you will engage members of DCPC, you will engage friends of the church, constituents of the church, as well as community members outside the walls of the church in open-ended conversations to learn what areas of mission, both current mission and potential mission, they feel passionately about, and that they would be willing to participate in and be engaged in as a church community. So a couple of things I want to highlight in that statement that I just made is that what you're going to engage in are open-ended conversations. We're not going to come to people with a list of, do you think we should do A, B, C, or D as a church? You're really trying to have an open and broad conversation and hear what emerges from the community. You want to hear what areas of mission people feel passionately about. And you want to hear, and the second part of that is really important. They feel passionately about it, and they would be willing to participate in it. So it's not, what's very easy to happen is somebody should do X, Y, and Z, right? We've all experienced that. So what we want to make sure we're focused on in these conversations is, what do you feel so passionately about that you would be willing to be invested in that? And you need to ask that question directly a lot of the time. So the goals in the process will really be to develop a mission component to your capital campaign that will inspire the members of DCPC to participate and that will have theological integrity. We want to encourage participation and enthusiasm from a broad section of folks, for this vision to give a sense of shared mission and purpose. We want to increase relationships in the community and connectedness within the congregation, both inside and outside the church walls. And this is a process that you all will then know how to do, so you can use it in large and small ways in the life of the church as often as you'd like. In the congregation that I served in Northern Virginia, we used this process in a very small way in the children's ministry. We were having an experience that I'm sure is foreign to you all, but the children's ministry was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Children weren't coming, and we tried everything we could think of, and finally we said, all right, we can't fix there's nothing left to fix. We fixed everything, and people still are not coming. So what do we need to do? So we started having these sessions where we heard from the children and their families about what they wanted for their faith formation, and it led us to radically change what we're doing, and it actually quadrupled the number of kids that started coming to the programming. So it's phenomenal. And then Next Church has done this process in a denomination-wide listening campaign a few years ago around mission broadly in the PCUSA. So it can work in very small ways, and it can work in rather large ways. So it will be as successful as you are astute in your listening, as you are open in your listening, and as you are able to connect with a wide cross-section of folks. Another thing that will be key is follow-through on it. There's nothing more de-energizing than asking people to be involved in a process and then they feel like nothing was done with what they said. So if this becomes a report that you stick on a shelf, you will have disserved yourselves and the community. So be sure that you follow up with people and what you hear from them over the course of this campaign. And you can't, I don't think, over-communicate what you're hearing, what the process is, and what the next steps are. So what you'll do over the course of the campaign is hold these purpose group meetings with targeted people and groups over the course of the next 6 weeks. You'll want to do some very targeted group listening and purpose groups, but you'll also want to do a couple of opportunities that are more y'all come, so that people can opt into it without a specific invitation. So the former would be a group, like a neighborhood cluster group or a group of Sunday school teachers. That would be a targeted group. And then a Sunday session where you say, anybody who would like to participate, come for lunch after church one Sunday. So you want to make sure you hit both of those kinds of things. And then you'll come back together as the team of conveners after you've had these groups, and you'll share what you've heard. You'll try to identify any themes that have emerged, interesting ideas to pursue, and you'll want to also be looking for who are the people that have participated who had particular energy. And at the point that you all come back together as the conveners, you'll determine, based on what you've heard and where you're seeing some commonality, that either you've gotten a good cross-section and you're ready to move on, or you may figure out, we totally missed young adults, or we totally missed people who've been here for 30 or more years, or you may identify some holes in the listening. Or you may identify some things that you go, we're not clear on what we heard, so we need to go back to folks and try to understand better what it is that we've heard. So we will actually reconvene sort of midway through this process to see what you're hearing, and then we'll also do that at the end. From that, I think the process is going to be that you all will take all of what you've heard and distill it into some themes, and you'll give that to the Facilities and Capital Campaign Committee. And hopefully you will be in conversation with them to then distill that into a missional proposal that reflects the energy and passion of the folks that you've talked to, of the congregation and the community. And then that will get presented back to you all and to the congregation and any of their partners who've been part of this process. And they will get to then respond to it and say, yes, this does sound like it reflects what we've said and what we believe and what we feel, or it's missing some things. So there'll be a little bit of give and take, but it's not actually a proposal, like you're not going to have a congregational meeting and vote on it. It'll be a time for feedback and for massaging that proposal. And then you'll be able to launch the campaign with a missional proposal that already, hopefully, has investment and ownership by the community. So that's what our goal is. over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions so far? All right. Well, I'm going to walk you through what one of these purpose sessions look like, and that's the handout that you've got in front of you. And then we're going to practice them together. So be thinking about whether you want to be one of our fish in the fishbowl this evening. So the purpose of this campaign we've already gone over. This is a relational tool for discernment of God's direction for the congregation, and particularly the mission component of the capital campaign. What you're hoping to do as you convene these groups is to hear important stories about people's experience of mission and life in this community, from which we hope you'll be able to draw some conclusions, or at least identify some common themes that can inform the future direction of the church. And you also want to be looking for energy and ownership and potential leaders for a common action that can inform the future direction. So a purpose group meeting, you'll want to gather groups of about 8 to 15 people. It may be that you get a group of 20, and if that happens, you want to divide it into 2 groups so you can hear, so everybody really gets a full voice. And they should take an hour. You don't need to take more than an hour of people's time to do this. The way that the session will flow is that you'll open with prayer. You'll let everyone know that this meeting is part of a wider campaign that's happening. This isn't the only group that's meeting, but that you're doing a lot of these with a lot of people. And you'll share the purpose of the meeting, which is to discern together God's direction for DCPC, particularly around the mission component of the capital campaign. Similarly to what we did tonight, you'll want to send around a sign-in sheet and get people to sign in and share their email address and phone number. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that you want to just be able to track how many people and who has come to these. But there also may be times that you'll want to follow up with someone afterwards, so you'll want to have their information available. It's also really helpful to have information so you can follow up with the whole group to thank them for coming and make sure they know whenever it's time for the report back from you all to the whole congregation, that they get an invitation to that. So after you've shared the purpose of the meeting and prayed, you'll want to move to what I call a rounds question. And that's a question it's a way of introducing ourselves to one another. And people are invited to say their name and then also answer a question to try to get at the story and experience for the people in the room. As the convener, it's really helpful if you go first to model what you want people to do in response, to model the kind of answer you're looking for, to model some depth of an answer, and also a level of vulnerability that will be appropriate for the group, and also to model the amount of time you want the answer to be. When we're inviting people to share stories and experiences, and we're in the South, people could go on for an hour with their story if they're a good storyteller, or if they're not. So you want to use this as an opportunity to model both the time and the kind of answer that you're looking for. And then you'll go around the circle and ask everyone to do the same. The question that I'm going to encourage you to start with is to share a brief story of a time that you've been particularly proud of the mission work of Davidson College Presbyterian Church. So think about that for just a second. Hopefully some things easily come to mind for you.
Jessica, can I ask a question? When you say mission work, do you mean that in the broadest possible sense? Not just a particular mission? Okay.
Yeah, and people will answer that how they choose to answer it.
Okay.
Some people will think very broadly about God's mission in the world,
right.
And some people will think room in the inn. You know, so both are fine. I mean, I think it's good to let that be open-ended. As facilitators, as people share, you'll want to be gracious, but also firm in both probing for their stories. You don't want people to just list off 10 things. You want to get to what's the story about, what's the story underneath that, what's the why underneath it, why was that a meaningful thing for you, and to help people stay brief in their answers. One of the things I have found that is helpful to do as a facilitator is to interrupt one of the first people that goes in the circle. We tend to, in groups, the more times you go around, the longer people's stories get. And if you get to the 7th person, it's really awkward to interrupt that person because then they feel picked upon. But if you interrupt the second person, it's like you're still establishing the group norms and it's okay. So that's just a little facilitator tip I learned along the way. And you can do that very graciously, don't make anyone feel put upon, but to just say, you know what, we want to make sure we hear from everyone, so if you don't mind stopping there, we'll keep, or a couple more sentences, let's keep moving. Then you want, after you've heard from everyone's gone around the circle, you want to go deeper. You want to probe a little more deeply. Ideally, what will happen as people answer this rounds question, that it will unearth some possible points of commonality or some areas of difference that you'll want to probe more deeply. So you'll want to use open-ended questions again to probe more deeply. And this is where you're going to have to use your judgment and your discernment as a leader to figure out, where can I take this conversation? A good rule of thumb is to follow your own curiosity. If something has emerged in the conversation that is interesting to you, follow it. And you want to be keeping in mind that we're starting with this kind of question where people are proud of the work of DCPC as a way to build on the strength of the congregation, and also as a way to set us up to think about energy and passion. So as you're probing deeper, that's what you're trying to look for, is more energy, more passion, and building on the strength of the church. So for example, in the rounds sharing, you may hear multiple stories of people having transformative experiences on short-term mission trips. So a follow-up question might be, I heard many powerful experiences of short-term mission trips. I'm curious about the way those partnerships began and what the relationship is when you're not traveling to the place. Or you may hear stories about a meaningful mission project right here in the community. So a follow-up question to that might be, what partnerships have enabled that work to be meaningful and transformative? You may hear stories of a population that has not had much connection with the church in the past. So a follow-up question to that might be, do we have any connections to this population, with this group of people, so that we might begin a relationship with them? You may hear that people, you may hear the same thing identified over and over as something that people have found particularly meaningful. So you may want to ask, what are the conditions that made that particular thing successful? That made that something that people are very proud of? So again, we can try to replicate those conditions, or at least build on them. I've put some questions here that are good to have in your back pocket as probing questions, but you're definitely not wed to these, and these may or may not be the right questions. You definitely should not try to answer all of these. These are too many to get to in an hour. So pick a couple that work for you. You can tweak them. These are not set in stone. At some point in the conversation, you want to make sure it pivots toward the future. The conversation hopefully will naturally do that, but if it hasn't, you want to make sure that it does. So some of the questions that would help you do that are, what is the first one here, what's the next God-sized step for us to take in relation to the work that you've been describing? Or the question, as you think about the community in or around Davidson, what breaks your heart or what might break God's heart? Some of those that start to point us to what might be next for the church. So after you've been at this for about 45 minutes, you want to stop the conversation and try to summarize some themes that you've heard for the group. So 3 to 5 kind of themes that you've seen emerge. And they could be overlapping themes, or they could be, points of disconnect that you've noticed in the conversation. And check in with the group. Did I hear correctly? You might say something like, I noticed that all the mission experiences you've described have been ongoing for many, many, many years. Did I hear that correctly? Would you all agree with that assessment of my summation? Or you may want to pay attention to something you didn't hear. If no one mentions connection to the college, for example, that's interesting. Was that missing? Or why was that missing? In the children's ministry campaign that I mentioned, so we were talking about children's faith formation in the church, and we realized that no one had mentioned study of scripture in the groups that we were holding. So we realized we needed to check that out. No one has mentioned this. Is that because it's not important? And it was important, they just assumed it. So, but that was good to know, that it was assumed, so no one mentioned it. But we wanted to take that assumption into account. So the reason you want to try to do this kind of summation part is for several reasons. You want to start synthesizing the information that you're hearing with the group. It starts the process of consent. So they're already saying, yes, you've heard us well, or no, you haven't. So there can be some good give and take there. It's also a good check on you to make sure you're listening and you're not bringing in your own preconceived notions of what this group is going to say. So they may say, oh no, you didn't, that wasn't what we meant. That wasn't what I meant when I said X, Y, and Z. And the other thing it does is helps the group hear each other. And that's one of the most powerful things that this process does, is rather than one person hearing from you and you and you and having to filter it back out to all of you, you start to hear each other talk about what's been meaningful and what the hopes are, so that it's not the pastors or the staff or the session having to do that interpretation for you, but you start to hear each other. And then finally, at the conclusion of one of these sessions, you want to thank people for coming and you want to let them know of the next steps. So you want to let them know that you're going to take this summary of this conversation and bring it back to this group and give it over to the FACC ultimately, and that what is heard will be translated into a proposal that you'll bring back to the folks who have participated into the larger congregation, that they will get to hear the results of this. And then you'll close with prayer, and you're done. And you can do all that in an hour. So, are there questions right now as to the basic flow of this? Yes, Erin.
Will it be our job to be taking notes as well as listening, or is there somebody else that takes notes?
That can be up to you. I recommend, it's great to do these in pairs. And then one of you could be taking notes while the other is taking the lead on the facilitation. Or you can ask one of the participants to take notes. That's fine too. I usually find that I do jot, when I'm facilitating, I do usually jot some notes, but they're not, I can't take enough notes to be comprehensive. So someone else doing that too.
Yeah, our plan is to have facilitators in pairs so that one can ask questions and one can take notes.
Great.
So that's the plan.
The place where I can see that might fall apart is if you get a group of 25 people show up for a session and that's too many in one circle. So you'll want to break that into two and then you'll need to figure it out. But
then you'll need to assign somebody.
Yeah. Great question. Other questions? Other observations?
Can you?
Yeah.
So you've used the word campaign a number of times. When you say campaign, are you referring to this?
Great question.
Or because, and then you say capital campaign, and I will admit my ignorance, I didn't know we had a capital campaign.
Yeah, well,
So,
we
so if somebody could clarify that for me.
yeah, I don't think we need to use that word at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it is helpful for people to know that this is part of a process. Maybe process is a better word. That this is not an isolated kind of thing where you're just meeting with one group of people, but that it is a bigger scope, that you are trying to get the pulse of the congregation and the community.
Well, I think it's also really wise to have sort of a canned response to the question, because I'm sure someone in one session or another, or multiple sessions, might ask the question, well, how does this tie into a capital campaign? Or isn't this going to do, and we have to have a trained response to that is appropriate. And the other question that I had is about setting up the groups. Does it have to be open to the point that we can't control the numbers that are going to attend, or can we not have sign-up sheets or targeted in that way?
You definitely can have sign-up sheets and
So you can sort of cap the number in a group.
Yeah. I mean, I think for most of them, you would, if you're going to meet with a circle, for instance, that's naturally going to fit within this size, probably. If you do a y'all come thing after church on Sunday, hopefully you'll get more than 10 that come.
Would this also filter down to committees? Would you do like a committee?
Yep, yep.
Sunday school class.
Sunday school teachers would be interesting. The session would be interesting to hear from. People who've joined in the last 3 years would be an interesting group to hear from. People who've been here more than 40 years would be an interesting group to hear from. So be thinking about the different ways people can get relatively easily parsed out by entities.
I'm also stuck on the campaign word, and I'm wondering if there's another term. Is this a stock term that needs to be used in this planning, or could we come up with our own? And I don't know what it is, but I just think campaign, we begin to hear the cash register.
Yeah, so the only thing I'm trying to communicate with the word campaign is that it's a fixed thing. This is not a process that's gonna go on for a year. We're gonna do this process now. It's gonna have a beginning, middle, and end, and here's what you're gonna get from it. And it's something we want everybody to be invested in for the next 8 weeks, and then it's gonna
So we
end.
should throw out the capital campaign.
Yeah, because there hasn't been anything mentioned about capital campaign. We want to
Okay,
serve.
throw that out.
The mission of the church is one thing,
Right.
but
Yeah.
in conjunction with the capital campaign is kind of coming out.
Okay, okay.
Well,
So-
we're gonna have to advertise this, so we're gonna have to have some kind of buzzwords
Yes.
or keywords that people will recognize
Yeah.
what they're signing up to
Yeah.
come to.
Yeah. So maybe it's a discernment process. Maybe that's a better a discernment
So,
process that we're engaged in.
It strikes me that, in previous times when we brought on new senior leadership, we have done mission studies, I think is what we used to call them. And so I don't think it seems illogical to maybe couch some of this in the fact that we're, a lot has changed in the last several years, and we're just trying to take a pulse of where our passion is for mission. And wouldn't that be a great thing for us to understand better as our new pastor arrives, whenever that happens?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's a little more disarming.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the interim process, so that makes perfect sense.
So I will leave it
Yeah.
to Scott to give you the boilerplate language that you need for this, given all the good points that y'all are raising. Yeah.
No, you.
I think that's, all of you got at what I was thinking about, but I think it's really important for something like this to set the context, not only for why we're doing it, if you get people together and you've got that much energy in the room, but as part of an interim process, but in terms of what we're actually doing and who authorizes this. I mean, that might sound a little too Presbyterian, but I think it's very important to get a sense of not only why we're doing what we're doing, but also under kind of what auspices we're doing this. And we need to be very consistent about that in terms of different groups, because if some of us are giving one message and somebody else is giving a different message, I think that is a real concern. So,
Yeah.
You're right.
Do you want to speak to that at all, of what, just as you're sitting here, what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think after this meeting, we're going to have to get together as a group and iron out some of these language issues and sort of the logistics of how we're going to organize these group meetings within the congregation and so on. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on that tonight, because we're just talking about with Jessica, like, how to do it. But this stuff, I think we can do at our next gathering. Yeah.
Scott, a sort of short story that comes to mind for me, what I thought was sort of summarized why we're doing this was we asked each committee to come up with a wish list, financially and otherwise. From that, we looked at it and we took a step back, and I love what Nancy's, we've all heard the Henry Ford story a million times, but if you had asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, but instead he brought the automobile. You know, and I think what we said was, the reason we want to take a step back is it'd be easy to launch a capital campaign based on what property said, or Christian Ed said, or what, and then we kind of said, whoa, but let's be sure that we don't, what direction are we going?
Right.
And I don't know if that's the short story, but that's what my take is on why we're here.
But
so.
the direction is direction, whether we initiate a capital campaign or not.
Right.
So.
Right,
in
I don't
the
want to be
context-
so focused that, okay, are we gonna get to spend a pot of money, and where should we spend it?
Yeah.
And I think we wanna steer away from that, because we maybe don't even need to spend money on it.
Well, you mentioned an open-ended discussion, but if we have an open-ended discussion, we still have to have some continuity between these groups, just as
Correct.
what was said.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Otherwise, people are gonna think, well, that's not what my group did, maybe I better go to another group and see, you know, what kind of responses are going on there.
Right.
So, I don't know whether we need this in a script form or in buzzword form or whatever, but
Right.
to help us stay consistent, I think we're gonna need some of that
Yeah.
mapped out for us.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're speaking to is really, that's why, when you have the groups and you start looking at, are there themes that are emerging? If there are no themes that are emerging and there's total disparate thought, which could happen, then we're going to figure out strategically how do we address that, because you're gonna wanna start communicating back sooner than later to the congregation that, whoa, we are not in the same place, friends. However, if there are some, general themes that are emerging, then it's easier to pull it together and do one kind of congregational Sunday where you say, here's what we heard, and here are the 3 priorities that emerged. And then people will say, oh yeah, my group said that, that's good. There'll be a few people who have a particular agenda that won't fit into that, but most often, there are some themes that emerge that then people will say, yeah, my group said that. But we will check in midway through so that if we get to the point where, whoa, this group is saying this, and this group this, and there's no consensus, then we'll need to troubleshoot that along the way.
As part of this, how interested are we in determining what's not working and narrowing some things, as opposed to what I've also heard is broadening out and hearing maybe new things that people are passionate about? To sort of put that in context, in 2 different situations where I've done something similar. One was working with a private school that was hiring a new headmaster, but again was struggling a little bit for some extra contributions, and we kept that very broad. So people could also complain and go, and you're teaching this and this and this, and we really don't think our kids need to know that type of thing. In another situation, we were working with a large bank, and we were trying to get their employees to more readily accept both the cultures of new customers and new employees. It was in Detroit. There's a huge, well, you can imagine. So there, when the people started to complain about it, we don't like that they do this and they do that and that, we were pretty much cutting them off. Because the goal was for them to grow and to learn to accept different groups, and we didn't need to hear about why it wasn't a good idea to accept different groups. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I think I would say that in the groups, it's good to note if there's complaints, but you don't want it to turn into a complaint session. That's not going to be helpful, it's not generative. If someone really has a bee in their bonnet, I would follow up with them later and say, I hear that you were upset about X, can we find another time to talk about that, or can I connect you to the right people to talk about that? But these groups are not complaining sessions overall. But they may unearth some things that people go, yeah, I don't get why we do that, or I don't like that we do that, and that's good to know. But you don't want it to turn into a ain't it awful session overall. That help?
It does help.
Okay.
As a group, if there's things that people, there's a tendency to find several things that people agree on that they don't approve of. Is that something that the congregation thinks they back away from? Or
I think that's great to bring back to
right.
figure out. And the other thing that can be helpful, and again I want to reiterate that one of the things that's really helpful about these is it helps people hear each other. So often you'll have somebody go, I don't understand why we do Wednesday night programming, it's so hard to get here, and somebody else will go, oh, my family loves that, and then you kind of go, oh, good, like, we don't have to, people can have different experiences, and that can be okay. Rather than in my case, the pastor having to defend all of that all the time. So you don't want to shut down healthy kind of back and forth of, but if there's also consensus that we hate Sunday morning worship, that's good to report back. We'd like to know that.
Well, so the question of mission then is indeed as broad as you described it. I mean, it's like, what is this church going to do? Indeed, from worship, from, kind of how it operates internally to what it does externally. I mean, is that?
Yeah.
So we're asking, what is your vision for DCPC, sort of strategic planning kind of question?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, what's the purpose of this church? What's the mission of this church?
And what's the time horizon we're asking about?
3 to 5 years.
Okay. Interesting when it's going through its own vision.
Yes,
vision
I've been
process.
following it closely. I've even given some input.
So, okay.
Speaking of, January 17th is a town meeting for that purpose to contribute. If you're interested in going, let me know. I have more information for you.
Yeah.
I just came from that meeting, so.
All right, I think what I'd like us to do now, we could go one of two ways. We could get several of you to be guinea pigs and try one of these groups, or we can break into small groups and try, everybody gets a chance to try being in those groups. Is there a preference?
It'd be fun to watch.
Okay.
Role play. As
Right.
Stephen ministers are sitting here.
Okay, well, let's do that, then we'll have a little fishbowl. Why don't we set up a small group of maybe 5 chairs over here, and you all can either choose to populate those chairs or skedaddle over here really fast, so we'll have but we've given you 5 minutes. Okay, everybody, who's gonna join me? So we're gonna switch to another model if you don't consent. I'll leave. We have one more person? Come on, Pat. Do Pat, jeez.
Unrealistic for a minute.
Cynthia, come on.
Well, I'll tell you, I realize that the timeline we had discussed is not exactly what was presented tonight, and there's no way to be able to participate on the timeline that was done. So
We'll adjust it.
Listen, but we're not gonna be able to participate.
Yeah, we'll adjust the timeline.
Okay,
Yeah, we have until the end of February.
that's what I'm talking about.
But,
It's not gonna work for us.
yeah, but,
Sorry.
yeah, some people, have restrictions. Some people can only do it in January, when we'll work with that.
We can't do anything until, mid-March or
Okay.
the end, so that's why.
for you to be in this group
Yeah.
right now.
And I'm just not doing that.
All right, we'll go with the Christians we got over here. So, we're gonna sort of cut through some of the beginning stuff so that we can delve right into the conversation. And, we're not role playing right now, so I want you to answer honestly. Don't make up stories, but we'll have a real version of this right now. So let's go around the circle and introduce ourselves, and I invite you to share a brief story of a time that you've been particularly proud of the mission of DCPC. So take a minute to think about a story, a time that you've been particularly proud of the mission of DCPC, and then we'll get started. And since I knew the question was coming, I'm gonna go first. Since I'm not from this church, I'm gonna share a story from the church that I am most familiar with. So this church, the youth group of the congregation got really passionate about a mission project with some mission work, some travel mission work that a family was connected to in South Africa. And they, the youth group decided to raise money to fund a preschool in South Africa, and they raised money particularly to refurbish the kitchen in this preschool. And the thing that made me really proud of these kids was that they not only, they figured out that if they raised enough money to redo the kitchen to bring it up to code, that then the government would kick in and give money to essentially matching funds. The preschool would not just serve the children in the preschool, but could serve all the families in the code. So it was really a good, to me, I was really proud of them for not just doing a kind of mission that was us coming in and saving someone else, but then figuring out a way to engage a community of people and to expand the partnership beyond what anybody had imagined, but also to bring some self-sufficiency and to care for the entire community, not just for a select group of kids. So that is the story that sticks with me. And I'm done, by the way. Dave, you go?
So I'm that person in the group that probably has the least amount of knowledge about the greater mission of the church, because I haven't been on any mission trips and am not as intimately familiar with perhaps what we do in Nicaragua and what we do in other outreach. But the things that, in my experience in the years here, I've been drawn to the things that allow the congregation to have fellowship beyond church. The retreats, the lunches after church, Wednesday Night Live, those kinds of things that engage people in fellowship outside church.
And what's made you proud about DCPC and those like that?
Just the way that we continuously look for ways to grow that and do different things, and that sort of rest on. We really do try to do what the demographics in the community are seeking. We think they want.
And what do you see? I don't mean to pick on you. I'm just curious.
All right.
What do you see happen in those gatherings? Meaningful.
Just the different families that come and go. I mean, and I guess it's just a safe environment, so families can kind of let their guard down. And kids could be kids, and adults could be adults, or adults could be kids, and that's sort of.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Nate, and I'm probably guilty of a little bit of recency bias, but I'm taking over the campus ministry committee. And one of the things that we do there is twice a year we host a cookie study break for the students of the campus. And you all provide cookies. We go and bring cookies and dogs, interestingly enough, to give the kids a little bit of a study break. And this most recent, beginning in December, we served probably around 250, 260 kids. And the degree of appreciation that these kids who are surely stressed out to a relatively extreme degree, that we've done that small act of kindness, clearly had deep meaning for the kids who were there. And when you can get that sort of connection over that number of kids in just an hour and a half, I think it's about 90 minutes, I think it's pretty meaningful.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Cambria, and I am really proud of our church's ministry of hospitality to the community in partnership with the town during Christmas and Davidson when we host Santa Claus in our congregation house. Hundreds of families who are not part of our church come into our building because of this, and they see artwork done by all the preschoolers in our preschool year, and they see different mission projects that we support in our alternative fair, and they see lots of smiling, interested people who are really happy to see them there. and people who are of every age in this congregation volunteer. In fact, too many of them were there this year. They do, but they didn't want to. And it's just, and I got to be one of the people who, for a very short period of time, I could have done it all night for 3 nights in a row, but I was the last person that they talked to before they got to CC. And so I got to talk to little kids about what they wanted for Christmas and, you know, talk to their parents and you know, see how it's gonna go. So the connections that we offer to, you know, the whole community by just hosting Santa Claus. I don't think we could get hundreds of families in here anyway. I'm very proud of that, and we've only been doing it for 3 years. Yeah. And some people may think it's really fluffy, but it's huge outreach. Yeah. Great, thank you.
Can I just say parenthetically, I worry a little bit about the fact that there will be people in our congregation for whom mission, broadly or refined, is going to feel like inside baseball, that they are not really purpose. Yeah, I just, I worry about that a little bit. I mean, as an example, Rachel and I had the opportunity to go to Kenya last year, which is amazing. It was the greatest trip I've ever been on with my daughter. But there's like 40 people in our church who actually gone to Kenya. So talking about inside baseball, it's really hard to necessarily articulate that as broadly as Rachel and I tend to. But
you're on notice.
I would say that the mission thing that really I'll never forget and will always cherish was back in the early 90s, I worked with the senior high youth with Linda Stever. And as a nation, we were slowly coming to grips with AIDS, generally. And so I put together a program with Linda where we were going to take the youth, the seniors, the older kids, down to Atlanta for a whole weekend of programming, sort of with that as a general theme, like how do we react to this sort of thing. And we had kids that were all across the realm in terms of like, to like, I want to find a compassionate way to do it. Went to the session to actually ask for permission to do it. And it was, the session was so like, this is great, let's do it, you should definitely do it. Like, I wasn't a professional, we were treading on property that was previously not really been handled by this church. It ultimately ended up with us getting the RAIN, being part of the Charlotte RAIN team program. But seeing our kids going to a service, a church service in Atlanta, at an LGBTQ church where the kid who was the most resistant to any of it going into it, like because we prepared for weeks, seeing him just throwing his arms around a 6'8" trans guy dressed like Jackie Onassis. I mean, it was incredible. And so that's what I'll always remember.
Awesome. So I'm thinking about the stories that you just shared and thinking if you could take one step removed from those stories, what are some of the ingredients that make them sticky to you? I mean, you've just named some serious transformation and some risks taken by the church. I mean, you named some hospitality and significant connection with people outside the walls of the church. What are some of the other kind of ingredients that are making these stories the ones that stick with you?
I think hospitality is a key word there. I think that draws these, our three in particular, together is that it's not, you don't always need a strict program in place. Providing a meal and an open heart is often the entry point.
Well, that draws yours together too.
Yeah, well, and the success behind them is, I guess, this church's commitment to continuing to push to find new ways to reach out within and so forth, I think we could kind of tap into that to figure out our next steps, I think.
It's safety, and a little bit more of a development of the hospitality thing. But this notion that if you're engaged with DCPC in this sort of realm, there won't be judgment, or you don't have to worry about being yourself or being inculcated within the broader community. So when you go to a Wonderful Wednesday program, that kind of thing, people are eager to interact, you know, and that's kind of a safe hospitality as opposed to, what if I go there and I don't know anybody or nobody talks to me or whatever. And I think the Santa Claus thing is a great example of that. The people that I observed that have never probably jumped in the door of DCPC, but they see that this is a safe place.
Yeah.
The word service comes to mind, you know, because, you know, whether you're participating in things outside of worship or facilitating or making them happen, you're in service to the congregation, to your fellow human beings, to the community. And I think, you know, the more we can encourage and facilitate that in every member of the church, then the more we can do, open it out.
So if you were to imagine, if you could grant a wish in 5 years, can you describe a picture of something you wish the church you were doing as part of the church? Specifically meaningful? What would be the next step in the thing you've already described? What would that look like 5 years from now to continue to flourish?
I wish that 5 years from now, that every person that was a member of this church or interested in becoming a member of this church were to look at it as almost like half of the compact, half of the covenant is to be an active part of the mission. That it's not just, when I lived in Atlanta a long time ago, I went to Peachtree Presbyterian because it was huge and nameless and faceless, and I didn't want to have the time to engage. So it's perfect in that regard. I would love it if this church would be so naturally mission-oriented that people would be like, oh, that's precisely why I joined, is because there's such an obvious emphasis on mission.
And that's what I go for. I don't go for Sunday service.
Well,
but it's important.
Yeah. That's pointing to kind of a cultural value of the church.
Like a shift.
Shift, yeah. Oh, good, you haven't spoken yet.
Yes, well, I'm going to have
And it can be much more concrete, you're not with a sort of philosophical shift, but it could be, I want 300 students to come rather than 50, or.
I think on some level, when it comes to our mission and our outreach and how we do things, I think ideally, I'd like to see a church that does extend beyond the emphasis on Sunday morning worship. And I realize that is a hard, we're Presbyterians, we like our structure. But I think that's part of it is on the big picture of how we address the cultural changes that we're forced to deal with. I think we need to be as flexible as possible to reach people where they are. An example, I drove by the Cove Church today, which is a non-denominational, just up the road, if you're not familiar. And you look at their service offerings, and it's Monday at 7, Saturday at 4 and 6, 4 services on Sunday, and I think there was a Wednesday night listed in the meantime. They've got a list this long of options. And that may be, we may have to start to think in terms of smaller, less traditional connection points really excel going forward, as hard as that may be for us, for all of us, meaning all Presbyterians, frankly, to address.
Can you imagine some of what that might look like here? Would it be multiple worship services, or are there other?
I think I'm a frequent participant of Wednesday Night Live, so I think that is something that is very important to our family and where we are. Things like that, the luncheons after church are meaningful to us, certainly as much as we can make them. And though I don't have children, the kids here directly, but I think from what I understand, our youth ministry is extremely vibrant right now. Kids. And I think that's a great opportunity that we don't, we want to maximize that as much as possible. And selfishly, to some degree, campus ministry as well, because I think that, we are part of that community. Now, not officially, and there's a kind of a Chinese wall there on all those details, but on a philosophical level, we would like to be a place that is open to those folks, to those college kids who, to be a home away from home from them, even if that doesn't mean that they're going to join our numbers and they don't contribute to those type of things. It's important for us to get to those folks who are looking for a place to be.
Okay, I'm going to pause this right here. To all of you listening, if you were in my chair right now, what questions might you ask this group to keep the conversation going, to probe a little more deeply?
I was wondering if they talked a little more about how all these relate as relational, that we are getting to know each other, we're getting to participate in things with each other, no matter what they might be, whether they're outside the church, or an outside mission, or whether there's something that's internal. And that, to me, seems a real important element, is to talk about how these relate to each other, how you're getting to know the other members of the church. That's why I love the day of service, because I think that combines the service and the fellowship together. I'm wondering if you see those all as relational.
Yeah, that'd be a great question. Yeah. And then also, the way you phrased it too also gets to the, I'm hearing that, are you all hearing that? And it's a way to check, is that a theme that's emerging or not? Yeah, great. So I don't want you to answer that right now. We're just gonna pull some other questions.
I really like this question, what do you want Meet Our Church to be? And I think you could spend an hour just on that question. I mean, if I understand it, that sounds like the question we're trying to get answered.
Yeah.
And I want everybody in the group to not just say one thing, but say multiple answers to that question, so that, because everybody, I mean, Dave's not gonna just have one answer to that question, he's gonna have a list of 5 things. And so I wanna know all of those things.
And I think the trick there is to not have it be so kind of cerebral, that it's not grounded in experience and reality. And like, we can all name 50 things we'd love the church to be, but they're not really the most core things that, like, I'm willing to invest myself in this. So you're exactly right, and the only hesitation is to.
Well, then and then, if everybody's got those things, then you begin to see where's the commonality, and where are the things that, of the 10 things that Dave listed, what are the 2 or 3 that this group could actually want to make reality?
Yeah, great. What other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, the word, I'm getting a little hung up on the use of the word mission. So, and maybe this would be, what I'm hearing is service, relationships. Somebody might have mentioned worship briefly, I didn't hear anything about, I guess, education or spirituality or growing in your faith. Is that, maybe that's not important, I don't know.
We just assumed that was.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a great thing to test out, like, was that assumed, is that part of that or not? Yeah, so, great instinct. What else? I hope you're jotting these questions down. Beautiful survey.
Well, the church has a mission statement, right? You sometimes reverse. I mean, that would be a good thing to test and, validate and give some blanks to, in the vein of the different aspects of mission.
Would it be appropriate to have that at the meetings of the groups, to just say this is what our mission statement currently is, just so you know?
I think y'all would wanna decide that, I mean, I think some of the benefit of that is that it gives you a grounding place to start. The danger in that is that it narrows it to, this is what we're supposed to be about, and it sort of limits people's thinking.
We could get a new mission statement out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah, our mission statement now is, I don't mean to be disparaging, it's a little bit of a laundry list. It's worshiping and serving. I thought it was interesting, somebody posed to me an interesting question of why were they listed in that order, the words that are in our mission statement, and is there relevance in that order?
Guarantee you somebody thought through that.
I'm sure, right, but I think that the question was, a pointed one, which was, why do we have them in this order? Should there not be some things that are ahead of others?
Yeah.
And
And even
so
that,
their vision of the church would have been something that's
yeah.
shifting that trend, that mission.
And that would point to, I think, one of the dangers of having the mission statement there is that it would become a critique of the mission statement rather than an open conversation. So pluses and minuses. All right, let's stop here and thank you all for being willing to do the we obviously did not go through the whole process there, but at least got you started on how you begin and how you start probing more deeply. And then the questions you all were raising were getting at exactly the next phase, which is to try to distill some themes, try to probe more deeply, and to check in with the group on their reactions. So you're all ready to do this now. Perfect. Thank you guys. Let's go back to our seats. What are some things that, since we use that as a teaching tool, what are some of the things that you've noticed that happened that you want to make sure you try to repeat, or some things that happened you go, oh, that wasn't a great moment, I want to try to avoid that. So what facilitation convening things did you pick up on?
I liked how open everything was, and the result of that was we came up with some very different experiences, but that all shared the service aspect, but in many different ways. So I think, I'm also bothered by the way you have the word mission. I liked your word of vision, the vision for the church, and then,
or the purpose.
yeah. But I liked the way that the group really expanded it to their vision, which is, and I much better service, which appeals to me personally, so maybe that's why I like it. But I liked that, how that evolved and how open-ended it was.
Yeah, that's great.
And it seemed to me that there was a sort of progress from each person telling about their own experience and feeling good about it. So at one point there was this feeling that the whole group was feeling the same kind of well-being in this church and happiness about it. And I thought that was a good thing to observe, somebody watching it.
Yeah.
I think one reason why we observe that is this group knows each other fairly well, which says to me that might be a benefit as we form the groups. Or maybe it should be the opposite, I don't know, but there's some degree of nodding has each other. I mean, this group just knew each other, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be tricky if people don't have any knowledge of each other to just create enough trust in the group to be honest even about what you're actually thinking, or certainly to have a different opinion than what seems to be the meaning. So as a facilitator, you want to pay attention to that make sure there's space for, if the group starts going, yeah, say, well, is that everyone's experience? Or does anybody have a different experience? Give some space.
I do think Stephanie might have to really intentionally try to help us think through how these groups work. Because if all the circles did the circles and all of the men in the Friday morning Bible study did that, I mean, there's gotta be a very intentional outreach to people in the church that are not necessarily plugged in.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you probably more than anyone has your fingers on the pulse of newer members or less engaged members and how we could reach out and make that meaningful.
We had made a list of all the groups in the church and then also neighborhoods. You know, from Mooresville to Charlotte to Concord, you know, we would have geographic groups in addition to different groups that are already existing in the church.
Right, so the next question is, what is the process of forming the groups? Like, how do we invite people? Are we intentional in trying to put together a group, or are we open if they all come, like you said?
I think for the majority of your groups, I think you'll be well served by being intentional. And then you'll want to have a couple of y'all comes just so anybody that's heard about it, like, you don't want anyone left out of this process if they want to participate. So a few y'all come events will be important, but we all know that you get better turnout when there's a specific invitation.
So there will need to be like a script or an invitation written that goes out to like a certain, like a constant contact with one set of people.
Yes.
And maybe they don't necessarily know who each other is, or do they?
They don't need, I mean, they don't need to necessarily. Like if you're
But
gonna
we
do
do.
a neighborhood
But they don't have
group.
to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And probably, you know, if you're trying to get the circles to do this and you're trying to get the neighborhood to do this, people are gonna get invited more than once. And so you'll probably want some language of, you can come to more than one or don't come to more than one. And it doesn't really matter either way. But people will start asking, well, wait, I've gotten invited to 2 of these, which do I go to?
Right.
And the answer is whichever works. Go to whichever you want to.
Is there some number of membership, not necessarily including, you know, outside of the church house, that we're trying to reach with this process, or some percentage?
Yeah.
As opposed, I mean, I'm sure we'd love to hear from everybody, but.
Yeah, you won't hear from everyone. What's your reaction to that, Scott?
Well, we're trying to get a representative cross-section of the congregation. And the formula that we're working on is we're trying to have an hour-long conversation with about half the number of people that typically show up for worship on a typical Sunday morning, which is about 200 to 250 people. So that, if we had a conversation with that number of people, like what you just saw, we would get that would give us a pretty good sampling of what the larger congregation is thinking.
And I think
Yeah.
to add to that, I would say that probably more important than the number of people
Yeah.
is, do you have a good cross-section? Have you heard from the people who are not engaged? Have you heard from people who are super engaged? Have you heard from the middle? Have you heard from younger people? Have you heard from older people? Have you heard from shut-ins? Have you heard, you know, people who are here every time the door opens? You need to hear from all of those groups. So
Right.
you may have a job for you in that.
Yeah.
But to really pay attention more to, did we get some of everything, then did we hit the magic number of 250?
Jessica, I was just wondering if it would be a good idea to have some open areas in these groups. If you saw a group was starting to get so full, and you thought, well, you were gonna probably run over and need another group, but you need some extra slots, it seems to me, because people today go by, not necessarily the group that's invited, but it's by time of day or day of the week.
Sure.
Or, you know, am I really gonna be able to make that group? So it seems to me, if you had 3 or 4 that are in that group that are not part of the target group, you just got even better cross-section, and you got, you're appealing to more people, you're
Yes.
reaching out in a better way to more people.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So y'all will know the logistics best of your people, of how to organize this. So it's gonna be kind of a bear, but you'll figure it out.
Stephanie knows everybody in the church.
I really do.
And, you know, a small group of us will get together before we get you all together again with a plan, so that we're not hashing this out in a larger group. So we'll have a strategy before we meet next time to organize that.
Yeah, so the organization and also getting clear on the language,
Right.
getting clear on what that rounds question is, so that everyone's asking the same question to start with the same language, and a clear sense of the purpose, so that that's boilerplate across the group. That'll be really helpful to get organized before you all get started. A couple of things to pay attention to and to avoid as you get into this. You want to avoid the expectation that the purpose of these groups is to generate ideas and actions that someone else is going to do for people. So you really do want to emphasize, this is not a to-do list that you're going to take back to the session or the staff. This is what do we as the community want to invest our time and energy into. So if you notice it starting to shift into, well, the session really should, or the staff really should, or the so-and-so really should, you want to try to turn the corner into a different direction. You may even want to stop and say, you know, I notice we're doing this, and I want to remind us that we are the church. So what do we want the church to be? Similarly, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and we don't want to be generating a list of complaints about things. If there are common concerns that arise that are troublesome to people, note those, but you don't want to just get into a, oh, ain't this awful, kind of, let's all moan about things. One way to also get at that is to challenge. You can gently challenge people's frustration or their hopes by saying, you know, what are you interested in doing to help more people get involved and connected in this congregation? Or whatever the complaint is, what would you see as a way to help change that situation? So to re-engage them in the solution, not just the problem. Another thing you want to avoid is there can be dynamics in groups where people separate themselves out. And a common way we see this is one person being an expert in the room. A way this might appear in these groups are someone who's been around for a while and might say, oh, well, we've tried that before and it didn't work, or you know, we could never do that because of X, Y, and Z, these legal issues or whatever. You want to try to minimize that if you can. Those may be really important concerns that need to get addressed, but we don't want that to dominate the conversation now, because right now is about generation, not shutting down. Yeah, not separation. So try to avoid the group kind of taking on, you know, some people rising to the above to be in charge or to be over-dominating. And you want to make sure that no one person is dominating the conversation. So some very simple facilitation things like, we haven't heard from several of you, what would you add? And maybe even directly saying, you know, Pat, what would you add to this conversation right now? Do you have anything to add? Can allow for one person not to just take over the conversation. What are some other facilitation kind of things that you all would name as important to pay attention to? You've facilitated groups before.
Body language.
Body language.
The person that's sitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So pay attention to the group's body language. Is someone sitting there like this?
And also to your
and
own.
also to your own.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. If you're sitting there like this, people will be less. And you want to be open and inviting. Yeah. What else?
Well, you were non-threatening in the way that you drew people out with the questions that you asked. It was very non-threatening.
Yeah,
and
good.
I think it put people at ease.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So we want to try to be probing without getting in people's business.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge, it'll be a real challenge to not let people talk forever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's, in any group, I think that's a huge challenge. It's like to know when to cut them off.
Yeah. I often find that it's helpful just to say that up front. Like, we're gonna have a tendency to probably go on, and at some point I'm gonna ask you to stop so that we can make sure we hear from everyone. And if you just sort of flag it at the beginning, it's much easier to then follow up on it than if you just have out of the blue say, Dave, be quiet, you're talking too much.
How do you feel about confidentiality? Is
That's
that
a great
important or is it
question.
open?
I think you want to be clear that you're going to take themes back. You know, what is said is going to be shared at least on a 10,000 foot level. But I think you'll have to use your discernment. If something comes up for someone that's something that does feel like, well, this is in the realm of what should be treated confidentially, I think you'd want to name that for the group of, you know, so-and-so has just shared something really personal. Let's keep that within the confines of this group, please. But generally speaking, the purpose of these groups is for this information to come back to a larger group. So you don't want to surprise people with that either.
You can also tell people that you know, they feel like they want to bring something up that is sensitive, to say so in advance to the group. So put everybody on notice.
Something that can be helpful if there's a targeted question, is to give people a couple of minutes to do individual brainstorming.
Yes.
And so, you know, if the question is, what's our vision for education in the church? Then instead of just top of mind, write down the, you know, tell people to write down 5, you know, whatever, thoughts, and then have them share some of their, you know, start with 1 or 2 that are most important and share that. Because it can easily just sort of go down the rabbit hole of the first thing that you think of, which may not be the most important thing that is on your list.
Right, exactly, yeah, that's a great, and having people write things down, it's amazing how that legitimizes things for people too, that if you ask them to write it down, they might speak up, that, you know, if you just said, hey, what do you think about X? But if you say, what did you write down? People say, well, I wrote these things down, because there's something concrete to refer back to, so that can be a really good way to draw people out.
Should we give people questions ahead of time, so that when they get there, they already know what they're gonna be asked? And they would have thought about it?
Or give them a key word to think about.
I would say, you know, as you craft the invitation to these groups, and I would say, you know, it needs to be a specific invitation, but it also should be mentioned from the pulpit, it should be in the newsletter. I would say you'd want to frame that invitation so that people are starting to think about whatever you're going to ask them ultimately. I don't know that I'd want to give them the exact question, because you don't necessarily want people to come in with a dissertation that they've already decided upon. You do want some of it to be a little more spontaneous, but to give them some guidance ahead of time would be good.
Could you talk about why it's important to talk to groups outside of the church?
Yes. We can be really insular in the church. We can assume people have the same experience we have of ourselves that we have, and that is not true. You know, if you're in a group, you have an experience of that group. If you're outside the group, you have a different experience. So I would recommend I would challenge all of you to challenge yourselves to have one of these groups, or just an individual conversation with someone outside the church, and that could be the leader of you know, the AA group that meets here, or someone who owns a coffee shop across the street, to hear what their perceptions of the church are, because that can be really informative. We might think this is a very open, hospitable, welcoming place, and other people might say, gosh, that place is a fortress. And that's important to know. If the community surrounding you has a very different perception than you have of yourselves, it's a good way to hold a mirror up. So that's one reason to talk to people outside the church. I think a second reason is to see what potential partnerships are out there. It could be that you know, every business on the street is really interested in figuring out how to create a home away from home for students. Well, if that's a primary part of your campus ministry program, maybe you don't have to be baking all the cookies because the businesses will donate them. Or, you know, I don't know. That's probably a silly example, but you know, there may be potentials to do stuff together that you haven't envisioned before. So it's both to help you get a sense of the community's perspective and perception of you, and to start making inroads of what could we imagine together, particularly as you're thinking about Davidson the town and the changing, I mean, gosh, since I was a kid in Charlotte to what this looks like now is incredible, the difference. So as you're wrestling with that changing nature of this, Charlotte has encroached on you all. What does that look like? What does that mean? The town is probably wrestling with that too. So how do you all address that together? And again, that's something you'll want to coordinate together. If you don't want to all go bug the coffee shop owner about this. Figure out how you're- Oh, okay. And the schools, you're talking to teachers or principals of the local schools, that's a good place to connect as well. But to get other people's perceptions of what's happening here is really helpful. What questions, where are you anticipating? Are you feeling like you could do this?
Especially with the buddy system, I think that's gonna be great.
Buddy system is great. Buddy system is great. And know that when you're in the buddy system, you can turn to your partner. I mean, the way I stopped the group and said, what would you ask now? You can turn to your partner and say, Pat, what are you thinking? What should we ask the group now? I mean, you can do that with each other in a way that can be really helpful if you just find yourself stuck. And you will get in the middle of the group and go, I have no idea what to ask next. And that's okay. And pull the list out of your pocket and just go with something or ask your partner.
Does it seem like we have enough people to be facilitators?
I think so.
We have 20 pairs roughly, that's 200 people.
Yeah, we have roughly another 10 who couldn't be here tonight who are gonna watch this on video. So I think we'll have plenty.
And I think if you think about, if a pair, if you've got 15, 20 pairs,
Yeah.
then if you each do 2 sections, that'll be it. Someone's done it. And I would hope that in the course of 6 weeks, you can do more than that. Or maybe you thought you were only signing up for 1 session, which is also fine. But these are actually really fun. When you get into it, they're fun to connect with people, to hear what people are thinking. I mean, even that short 15 minutes, like, I want to talk to you all more. I mean, that's interesting. So they're fun to do. Yeah.
Do you ever have the groups themselves give feedback? So sitting in groups say, okay, thanks, please everybody give me 1 takeaway, which sometimes makes the group members feel like they've really been listened to. Mm-hmm. And it gives you something to go back through.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea at the end, to just say, every person go around similarly to what you did at the beginning, in a shorter form, say one thing you're taking away.
Write it down.
Yep, yeah, that can be really helpful.
Could you blend that in with what you were talking about? I heard you say,
Yes.
when you're doing your little summary, and
Mhm.
could you blend those together, and maybe it would help you to summarize as
Yeah,
well?
exactly. What the people say will help you know, okay, this is what, this is what we heard today. Yeah, exactly. And thinking through the end of the group, you definitely want to thank people. People's time is so precious. So thank people for doing this. I do think it's helpful to follow up with them to, again, to make sure that they know whenever the report back comes. It would be great if an email or something, you go out to everybody who participated to make sure you know that the results of all of this listening is coming back on this day and this report and whatever. So again, they feel another point of connection, they were heard, and their input has informed the bigger picture. The other thing I think you want to pay attention to is if somebody has particular energy or a particular passion, and particularly those who aren't, the person's already plugged into everything, you want to know that, and Stephanie wants to know that, and Scott wants to know that. So to follow up with individuals to say, you had such passion about education ministry, are you connected to that at the church, or whatever you can be great ambassadors for the network of things happening in the church if you take a few minutes to make sure that those people get connected to the right other people. in the congregation. So it would be worthwhile for the health of the body to take time to do that. And similarly, if there's someone who's just really upset about something, to get them to the right person as well. Or if a pastoral care need arises, which that may happen too. All right. Anything else that would be helpful for me? I can't wait to see where this goes. I'll look forward to checking in with you early February. I think we'll check in and see where things are. Scott, what do you need to, anything you need to close out with tonight?
Let's just stand and have a closing prayer, and we'll send you on your way. Thanks so much for coming tonight.